And here we are again. I swear I want to talk about something else. Please stop! The J-36 appeared in December 2024. We discussed it in detail in a long video with the information available at the time, and then it sort of went silent. CAC started flying it mostly at night, and the initial flow of pictures and videos slowed down. However, a few days ago, we had pictures of the rumored second prototype, and there are changes. And these changes are worth covering because making sense of them is, let's say, challenging. Three important components are involved: the air intakes, the nozzles, and the undercarriage. In all three cases, the modification may be hints that better define the mission and the capabilities of this aircraft. So, welcome to the channel. I am Gas, and this is Millennium 7. Obviously, the J-36 is a concentrate of technology, but the technology that is affecting our lives every day is AI. If you need to learn more about AI for your professional career, the sponsor of this video got it covered. So Outskill, the world's first AI-focused education platform, is hosting a 2-day AI Mastermind workshop, which is happening this Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. East to 7 p.m. East on both days. Over 10 million people across the globe have attended this training, and they have boosted their career growth and made business with zero code that makes revenue models worth $4,000 or $5,000. This training, which is rated 4.9/5 on Trustpilot and usually costs $395, is completely free for my audience because I have partnered with Outskill to give away 1,000 free seats for the next 48 hours as a part of the Halloween sale. But why do I urge you to join it? Firstly, this isn't theory. It's full hands-on AI training from practitioners at Microsoft and Nvidia, people who've actually built and shaped the industry. Secondly, in just 2 days you learn 10 plus AI-powered tools, AI in Excel sheets and presentations, building AI agents, automating your workflow, and much more. Also, you get access to the Learning Dashboard, where you are introduced to like-minded people to build with them and enhance your overall learning process. And that's not all. You'll also walk away with bonuses valued at $5,000, including a prompt Bible, a roadmap to monetize AI, and a personalized AI toolkit builder, only if you attend both days. Limited seats are available, so grab yours now via the link in the description. And join the WhatsApp community to stay updated before the big blast. Please support the people who support me. In the previous video that I'm attaching at the end of this one for your convenience, we concluded that the J-36 seems to be a long-range multi-role heavy platform capable of penetrating contested airspace to deliver large payloads either air-to-air or air-to-ground. This makes perfect sense in the Western Pacific theater, where targets will be spread over thousands and thousands of kilometers. The aircraft configuration hints to a supersonic but not hypersonic design, likely capable of supercruise and a top speed of around Mach 2 but not much higher. This point is now potentially called in question by the new pictures. In fact, the shape of the intake is different. The first prototype had carré intakes. The second prototype, though, has a different shape. The lower external corner protrudes forwards. This has made many people think that the new prototype features DSI intakes because that is how the external part of the intake would look like. However, I'm not 100% convinced. The pictures are really too blurry to see the DSI bump. We have explained DSI intake several times, and the main component is the classic DSI bump that we don't see on the J-36. It might be there, but I don't see it. So if the intakes are actually DSI intakes, like the intake for the central engine on the upper side, then the aircraft is optimized for transonic speed, say Mach 0.8 to 1.1. This is the range where DSI intakes have their peak efficiency. But being optimized for this speed range is typical of attack aircraft or aircraft that are expected to execute air combat maneuvers. But air combat maneuvers would contrast with the size and the design of the aircraft itself, which is definitely not optimized for that. If they're not DSI intakes, though, it simply means that one corner has been pushed forward, and this may be for stealth reasons or to better control a shockwave at supersonic speed. In this case, the aircraft roll would not change, it would just be a slightly different aerodynamic design. I personally bend towards the latter case because a low-ish speed design as inferred by the DSI intakes would likely contradict the role of a heavy weapon carrier. On the top of the aircraft, on the upper side of the aircraft, a DSI design makes sense because there is surely a very thick and established boundary layer to work with, even at the cost of a less efficient performance at high supersonic speed. There would be intake types more efficient at managing that boundary layer, but DSI offers up good compromise in terms of stealth and simplicity. DSI intakes on the side, though, would probably slow down the entire aircraft enough to have an impact on the capability of launching weapons at high supersonic speed. And we all know the importance of the supersonic release of weapons in terms of range and energy. We need better pictures to clarify this aspect. The undercarriage configuration has been redesigned with two wheels side by side rather than two wheels in line. Oh, come on! I can't really think of a reason for this. It actually seems a step back. In fact, the undercarriage retracts into the fuselage side. It seems the only option since the wing should be quite thin. A side-by-side configuration should occupy the fuselage volume, let's say, less efficiently than the inline configuration. Mechanically, this configuration side-by-side is simpler and lighter, but I wonder if the saved weight and the complexity justify the internals redesign. Changing the shape and size of the undercarriage base must have required a non-negligible redesign of that section of the fuselage. Bulkheads shapes must have varied, the aircraft's structural soundness must have been reassessed, and cabling and ducts must have been rerouted, and so on. I am sure that they have a very good reason for doing so, but I can't say it. Other updates are visible on the aircraft tail. The first prototype was showing some large mobile panels screening the engine exhaust from below. In the second prototype, they have been replaced by shorter structures with pretty evident serrations. This seems that radar stealth is now prioritized in respect of infrared stealth. And to be honest, there are also some other serrations here and there that have been simplified, so this is actually a possibility. Some commentators are putting forward the idea that these new serrations are part of a 2D thrust vectoring system. I personally don't see why it should be. In fact, while it is true that the appearance might suggest some form of thrust vectoring, it is not clear how that could fit into the overall J-36 design. Thrust vectoring is a way for maintaining control during air combat maneuvers. Aircraft like the Su-35 or the Su-57, with their 3D thrust vectoring, are almost impossible to get out of control flight. The J-36, though, is clearly too big and heavy for ACM. As we already said, I would be extremely surprised if air combat maneuvers would have been one of the design considerations. Furthermore, all the most recent Chinese designs do not feature a cannon, which would be the elective weapon for ACM, indicating a general lack of interest for this subject in the Chinese doctrine. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese pilots are told to never get in visual range. As I said before, the new tail configuration is probably just a way to increase radar stealth. The removal of the tail moving surfaces is likely just showing an increased confidence in the aircraft control laws. And there you have it, these are the changes we have seen in the second J-36 prototype. It is an extremely interesting aircraft, very original, and it's worth following during the course of its development quite closely. So, thank you very much for watching this short video. The original video about the J-36, which is still valid, is attached at the end of this one. An enormous thank you to all those who are supporting the channel by being a patron, by being a member, or by any of the other means available. You are absolute stars. I will never thank you enough. And if you can't support the channel financially, please like, subscribe if you haven't, hit the bell, leave a comment, because with the current algorithm, this is the best way of being notified when a new video drops. So this is it for the new J-36 prototype. I go, but you stay to watch the original video. So thank you very much for watching, and see you right now. On the 26th of December 2024, when the Western world was absorbed by the Christmas celebration and I was out of commission, the Chinese surprised the world with this. And to be honest, it wasn't the only Chinese surprise. There's plenty to discuss about China, but this video is the analysis of the new J-36. On the 26th of December, plenty of phones filmed a completely new and totally unexpected aircraft flying over Chengdu, the headquarters of the Chengdu Aircraft Corporation, one of the largest aircraft manufacturers in China. The fact that it was flying with the gear down and a J-20S as a chase plane is typical of first flights. Everybody started talking about the Chinese 6th generation aircraft and called it the J-36 from the first two numbers of the board painted on the fuselage. I will stick to this nomenclature for practicality, but we are not sure that the name is indeed J-36. And we are not sure it is a 6th generation aircraft, whatever the definition of 6th gen is. What I'm sure though is that it is unlike anything I have seen before. The general configuration is that of a delta wing, with a sweep of about 50 degrees on the leading edge and an inverse sweep of about 30 degrees on the trailing edge. The wing seems to have leading edge extensions with a sweep of about 65 degrees. The aircraft is not configured as a lifting body, nor as a flying wing. In fact, it has a distinct fuselage with the wing in median position. From side view, we can see that there is a part of the fuselage above the wing with the now iconic dorsal air intake. Quite surprisingly, the aircraft features 3 engines, 2 fed by the side intakes and the central one fed by a dorsal intake. This is a very unusual configuration that we will cover later, but this is just the first of the oddities in this aircraft. Always from the side we can appreciate that a cockpit seems to be present, so, well, it's not unmanned. However, it is difficult to say whether it is a single-seater or a dual-seater, and in this case, whether it is an inline or a side-by-side cockpit, albeit I think that the latter seems more likely. And it seems more likely because this aircraft is big. Not enormous, but surely quite large. There are plenty of estimates by OSINT observers, and the length should be around 21 meters, with the wingspan around 22 meters. These are calculated counting the pixels on the images we have and comparing them with the size of the J-20S, the one acting as a chase plane. And these proportions are enough to tell us that this is not a design optimized for hypersonic speed and not even for high supersonic speed. For comparison, the J-20 is about the same length or a bit shorter, but it has a wingspan of less than 13 meters. An F-15 is 19.5 meters long, but it has a wingspan of about 13 meters, like the J-20. And obviously, it is tailless, and it has no vertical stabilizers or control surfaces. Not even a small fin, not a strake, nothing. The wing seems to be a classic delta, that is, a wing with a very thin leading edge promoting the early formation of lifting vortices. If you look at the wing of modern deltas, particularly the European Delta canards, you will realize that the leading edge is quite thick and it hosts lift augmentation devices like slats that are often used for maneuver too. If we compare it with the wing of the F-106 or the early Mirage, we see that the leading edge, in the latter case, is much thinner. The reason is that a classic delta wing works by generating vortices above the wing that create a suction, so to speak, above the wing itself. The modern deltas, while still generating their vortices, have a sort of a hybrid wing where part of the lift is generated, like in conventional wings, by the shape of the aerofoil. On this channel we have an entire series dedicated to the delta wing and the delta canards. It is old, but the physics doesn't change every few years. In this case, on the J-36, it seems that the wing is quite thin and there are no leading edge lift augmentation devices visible. This type of wing is very efficient at transonic and supersonic speed, and with modern active controls, it is possible to manage the excursion of the aerodynamic center to have the aircraft flying in cruise at high subsonic or moderately subsonic speed in a condition of minimal trim drag. And mind, this gives us a hint of what kind of missions this aircraft is optimized for, but we will get back to it. However, there is another oddity blatantly evident. Why do you need leading edge root extensions in front of a purely delta wing? The Lurks are, in fact, a small delta wing usually placed in front of a conventional wing. They generate nonlinear lift at high angles of attack, they generate vortices, increasing the stable flight envelope of the aircraft and its maneuverability. They really seem not to make a lot of sense in front of a classic delta wing, which is basically already doing the same job. While having a second vortices system, if accurately designed, can be aerodynamically useful. An aircraft like the Gripen or the Mirage 2000 do have vortices generators for this purpose. In the case of the J-36, though, I believe that the Lurks have been introduced for two reasons. One is stealth, to manage the reflection of the intersection between wing and fuselage. The other is to generate additional lift at landing time at high angles of attack, thus allowing for a reduced landing speed. In fact, classic delta wings tend to have relatively fast landing speeds that require long runways and powerful braking systems, which add weight and complexity. And in general, the pilots are not particularly happy to land at high speed. And this is probably particularly important because there are no leading-edge high-lift devices. And the reason why they're not there is probably just another sacrifice to the stealth requirement. The Lurks could also be there to enhance maneuverability, as in many other aircraft, but this flies in the face of other features that we will see in a bit. Anyway, the really interesting bit of this wing is the trailing edge. The relatively high inverted sweep is probably there for stealth reasons as well, to decrease the observability from the tail sector. But this is not the main point. The main point is that each wing has 5 moving surfaces, plus there is evidence of 3 more at the end of the fuselage. I don't believe there ever was a Delta aircraft with 13 mobile surfaces on the trailing edge. And, as if this was not enough, there are 2 more oddities. The first, quite obvious, is the fact that there is no visible gap between the surfaces and the main wing structure. The shadow suggests that the hinge is actually covered by a sort of a flexible coating. This arrangement is not an absolute first, but it was used so far, at the best of my knowledge, only on light aircraft, and it was never used on a combat aircraft for stealth purposes. I believe this is a relatively elegant way of managing the radar return of the mobile surfaces intersections with the main wing, which is always problematic. However, this solution requires the engineering of a flexible radar-absorbing material capable of maintaining its features when heavily deformed. If this was the case, it would be a very interesting breakthrough in RAM materials. The F-35 has some form of hinge coverage, but in this case there seems to be a complete material continuity. And please notice that the Americans seem to go in a different direction with the shiny and glossy reflective coatings seen on test aircraft. From an engineering point of view, though, what is even stranger is that the housing of the mobile surface actuators is clearly visible for the 3 internal surfaces, which by the way means that these are likely conventional hydraulic actuators. However, no actuator is visible for the two external surfaces, and the hinge seems to be at an angle with the trailing edge. I can't really imagine why the latter, but the former likely means that the Chinese have developed some form of thin actuators, likely electric, which is a very little known stealth technology. In fact, the thin actuators allow for the elimination of the housing bulges, which are not terrible in terms of stealth, but obviously it is better doing without. But furthermore, they are conducive to smaller hinges or no hinges like on the F-35, which means less weight and better stealth. Why they are not using these thin actuators for all the surfaces, I don't know. Why did they implement 5 control surfaces per side is again very difficult to say. The only consideration that I would do is that with a tailless design, control is considerably more complex, in particular if some decent maneuverability is necessary, so more surfaces are probably a way of implementing complex control laws. All of this requires further unpacking because it is extremely interesting, but we need more information about this aircraft. The aircraft fuselage is well defined and proportionally quite wide. The fuselage section adheres to low observability principles, being uniform in section and forming an angle larger than 90 degrees with the wing. It is the same general solution of the J-20 in what seems to have become a Chengdu trademark configuration. The most relevant aspect, though, is the fuselage tapering toward the tail. It is very clear, and there is no doubt that this is an explicit design choice. This betrays a configuration designed for very low drag, particularly at high subsonic speed. Low drag doesn't mean only lower specific fuel consumption, but also improved acceleration. So you may wonder, why are not all the aircraft designed like this? Well, the Gripen is, to a certain extent, but usually on combat aircraft, the tail is occupied by the nozzles, which impose a limit to the section reduction. But as we will see in a bit, the J-36 has a different solution. The aircraft is clearly not area-ruled, the fuselage width is constant, however this tapering, albeit not ideal for the area rule, happens exactly where the wing frontal section increases the most. This means that it might have some role in reducing the wave drag too at transonic and supersonic speed. Overall, the fuselage section is quite regular, rather than having protuberances and bulges to accommodate internal components like it happens on the F-35. The aft section shows some shaping due to the engine housing, but it is really a small deviation. It is clearly designed to have a large internal volume, even if part of it is occupied by the 3-engine configuration and the associated air intakes. From tail to nose, the first element we see are the 3 moving flaps, which are part of what clearly seem to be a form of 2-dimensional thrust vectoring. Their overall configuration, which by the way is ideal for stealth, is similar to the YF-23 or some old Russian experimental designs. Thrust vectoring is usually associated to maneuvering or dogfight performance, which is also odd, since you would usually not associate these characteristics with a large aircraft. In this case, I believe it is a further contribution to the control laws, and it could be useful for trimming the aircraft. The fuselage, and the entire aircraft for what matters, seems very smooth, with very few details, as if it was entirely covered in that flexible radar-absorbing cladding we mentioned before. There are no formation lights, no inspection hatches, no apertures, nothing. This is obviously a low observability feature that is showing that the Chinese are valuing it at the same level as the Americans, but we'll discuss this in the future in a different video. Always going from tail to nose, then we meet the undercarriage, which is telling us where the aircraft center of gravity is. In fact, the aircraft, when sitting on the ground, must have a center of gravity slightly ahead of the undercarriage main leg, otherwise it would sit on the tail. I have to say that it seems to be slightly ahead of the position I would be expecting, given the wing planform that should add some weight to the tail, particularly when filled with fuel. It could well be that the back of the fuselage and the wing are particularly light. For example, they could be entirely made of composites. And to be honest, the lack of vertical surfaces is also helping in this respect, removing some of the typical tail weight. The undercarriage configuration with 2 tandem wheels hints to a relatively heavy aircraft. The configuration reminds me of the MiG-31, but it is probably just a coincidence. It is just a room-efficient configuration. The undercarriage retracts in 2 bays with serrated edges. The serrations seem quite small, which could mean that they are optimized for relatively higher frequencies than usual, but yeah, it's difficult to say. When the gear hatches are closed, I'm pretty sure that the electrical continuity of the external surface is assured by the contact. Between the 2 undercarriage bays, there seem to be 4 weapon bays doors. We have not seen them open, but I would imagine that there is a long central weapon bay with 2 shorter on the side. Or, considering that the central separation line seems thicker than the others, it could be 2 bays on each side of the center line with an irregular shape. Or even, it could be a single large weapon bay with compass doors and again an irregular shape. The J-20 configuration with a single large rectangular base spanning the entire width of the fuselage is very room efficient, and if it was adopted, it could become another Chengdu trademark. It is difficult to speculate why this long-short solution was chosen. It could be for structural reasons or for the placement of internal components. The central bay or section, depending on the configuration, should be long and deep enough to house the long PL-17 air-to-air missile, so it should be no less than 6 meters in length, which would be not enough to house 2 PL-15 in line. And I honestly believe that these are planned to be housed in the shorter bays on the side, maybe a couple each. Obviously, in the central bay, there should be room enough for a reasonable panoply of Chinese guided weapons. We often forget, because they are little publicized, that the Chinese do have a vast arsenal of guided weapons, and it is only reasonable that they will be integrated with this aircraft. And by the way, if you're interested to this subject, please let me know in the comments below. The ventral air intakes are pretty conventional for a stealth aircraft, with a lozenge section that helps minimizing the reflections. These are more efficient at high supersonic speed than the DSI intakes used on the J-20 and other recent Chinese solutions, but the dorsal intake, which is likely feeding the central engine, has a completely different section. It sort of looks like the design of the Su-75 intake, just upside down. It is not really clear in the available pictures, but there could be a small bump at the entrance, like on a DSI intake. What is sure, though, is that this intake is in the worst possible position when the angle of attack increases. This happens at slow speed, while landing, for example, but also when maneuvering. Which means that in a combat situation with air combat maneuvers, when the max thrust is required, the central engine is fed with a less effective airflow. This is a clear giveaway of the J-36 intended missions, but we will get to it at the end of the video. Just before the intakes, we have the nose wheel assembly, which is twin rather than single. Actually, after the recent J-35 presentation, many associate twin nose wheels with naval operations, but I don't think this aircraft, in its current form, could be operated from carriers. For the moment, this is a PLAF-only affair, I believe. Right above the nose wheel, we have the cockpit, whose configuration is uncertain, as we said at the beginning, so we don't discuss it again. The aircraft nose shows the usual chine of stealth aircraft, but the radome is not visible and, well, it may well not be installed on the first prototype. However, some details are visible and they're quite interesting. We see 2 panels with a lighter coloration in the position where side-looking radars would be. This is a configuration like the Su-57 or the J-20 itself. Then, right in front of the lyrics, there are 2 white areas, one on each side, that could be optical windows. I find it interesting that the EOTS assembly, like on the J-20 and the J-35, is not present on the J-36. This is suggesting that whatever the sensor suite of the aircraft will be, it will be different from the existing solutions. However, I have to say, on the side of the intakes, we observe two small protuberances that could be MOS or DAS systems, similar to what is installed on the J20. The obvious oddity on this design is the three-engine configuration. It is impossible to say exactly why the choice was made by the Chinese designers, but many observers have made some educated guesses. One reason may simply be trust. The Chinese still have some way to go to match Western engine performances, and this is probably the technology where there are still some differences. It is simply possible that just two of the available units did not have enough thrust for the desired performance. We don't know what engine is installed on the J-36. The most likely option, as far as we know, is the J-15 engine in a variant with these strange 2D nozzles. This is still in development, or it is just entering service. It has been originally designed for the J-20, but it could well be used on other aircraft. It would be a 180 kN engine, which is quite a lot of thrust, but the aircraft is also quite large and heavy, so it is not impossible that three engines were required. The other important element is electric power. This is a big problem for modern combat aircraft. The growing number and power of onboard electronics has started hitting the upper limit of what can be provided by an auxiliary engine-driven generator box. In fact, electrical power availability is often the main obstacle to the upgrade of older aircraft with modern electronics. This has led to the development of alternatives like the F-35 integrated power system or the developments that the Rolls-Royce is doing for the GCAP. But I am digressing. What is important to understand is that modern active electronics, radars and jammers, are very power hungry. Gallium nitride-based electronics can manage high specific power emissions. With three engines, the electric power generation capability is linearly scaled up by 50%. I do also expect that the Chinese have started developing some specific high-power, high-efficiency generators for the aircraft. But these details will take a long time to be verified, and here we are in the realm of speculation. Which is, by the way, the same speculation that seems to have affected YouTube and most of the usual online news outlets when it comes to the J-36 systems and armament. I have read or seen detailed specifications literally pulled out of thin air. But the truth is that we just don't know. We don't know anything about the radar, the passive sensors, the computational capability, the armament, the payloads, and so on. Surely, there is no doubt that China will equip the J-36 with the best they can afford. Surely, I am convinced that the gap between the US technology and the Chinese technology, when it comes to systems, now it is very small, or it isn't there anymore. Surely, with this being a large platform, we will have a complex array of multi-mission systems, but the truth is that we just don't know, and we have to suspend any judgment for the moment. What we don't have to suspend, though, is the speculation on why this aircraft even exists. This aircraft is quite big. The reasons why you want to make an aircraft big are payload, range, or both. And we can safely assume that in the case of the J-36, the reason is both. The weapon bays are large and the aircraft size is large. The undercarriage configuration suggests a maximum takeoff weight considerably larger than the average combat aircraft, probably in the ballpark of 50 tons or even a bit more. However, part of this weight increase is probably defeated by the presence of three engines. While they increase the thrust and power generation by 50%, they also increase weight and specific fuel consumption. This means that the increase in combat range compared to, say, a J-20 or a J-11 may not be as much as some are expecting. We don't know the fuel fraction of the J-36. With this general configuration, it should be quite high. I would not be surprised if it was around 45% or even more. However, with three engines, it is always possible to idle or turn one off during an economic cruise and still fly at high subsonic speed. Considering the wing and the fuselage design, I would expect this aircraft being capable of cruising very efficiently at high subsonic speed. However, the choice of the two ventral intakes suggests that some attention has been given to supersonic flight too, which is to be expected because launching missiles at supersonic speed, either air-to-air or air-to-ground, provides the weapon with extra energy, which increases range and lethality. I would expect that the J-36 would be super cruise capable exactly because it is a big advantage, and it would make no sense today to build an aircraft with any air-to-air capability that was not super cruise capable. Thus, it is possible that the aircraft is designed to cruise efficiently at high subsonic speed and/or at a moderately supersonic speed. I repeat, this is clearly not a very high-speed design. While I would guess it could probably have a maximum speed above Mach 2, the focus seems to be elsewhere. Incidentally, I would also bet that this is an aerodynamically stable design. Or better, I believe that this is neutral in the sense that the center of lift is very close to the center of gravity to minimize the aircraft trim drag, which is an important issue on Delta Wings aircraft, and it is an important component of cruise efficiency. In the same way, this is not a design made for air combat maneuvers, albeit in the test flight it has been seen with a bank angle of almost 90 degrees. The inertia of such a big aircraft around the roll and pitch axis is probably quite penalizing in these terms. Therefore, what are the missions of the J-36? In the light of what we have described, this seems to be a long-range, multi-role, heavy platform capable of penetrating contested airspace to deliver large payloads either air-to-air or air-to-ground. And this makes perfect sense in the Western Pacific theater where targets will be spread over thousands of kilometers. Actually, the more I think to it, the more I think it is showing similarities with the concept of the American NGAD. Once again, we are seeing the Chinese double approach of replying both symmetrically and asymmetrically to the US developments. I don't want to delve too deep into these aspects, these will be covered in another video down the line, but I find interesting how this confrontation at a distance resembles the old Cold War. I'm old enough to remember the reports that came from beyond the Iron Curtain, or how we waited for the parade of the 9th of May in Moscow to see whether the Soviet presented new weapons. Today, in the age of internet, everything is easier, faster, and even more exciting. And if it wasn't that we are talking about weapons and probably a coming war, these would be good times. But I'm afraid they're not. So, thank you very much for watching this video, thank you very much for having given me your attention. I consider this a honor and a privilege. I want to say a big thank you to all those who are supporting the channel financially on Patreon by being a member, or on GoFundMe, or by any other of the means available. You are absolute stars, I am incredibly grateful. If you can support the channel, which is perfectly fine, do it only if you can. Please interact with the video, leave a comment, hit like, hit the bell, because it's really helping with the algorithm. This is the end of this video, but there's plenty of Chinese stuff to discuss, so please stay tuned. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.
Sir, did you do a video about the Chinese J-36 without telling me?
Otis, don't worry, there's plenty to do. There will be other occasions, okay?
You know very well that I can take care of the research in China, sir.
Yes, Otis, I know, but honestly, I would like to avoid having some Chinese special forces breaking through the door.
I can take care of that too, sir.